Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man walah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Sohaib Saeed. I'm talking to you today about this new translation, the Quran Beheld by Sheikh Nuh Hamim Keller, very recently published. I bought this copy. I've not been asked to review it. So, what I'm going to say is on my own responsibility. And it is not intended to be a full review and a full academic assessment. But first impressions, as we've said in the title, I'm excited about this translation. I can see already that it marks a step forward in the field and also an opportunity for us to share some ideas about how we assess our current place in the field and how it might develop in the future. So, for those who might not know anything about me, my background is in tafsir and I studied at Al Azhar University. I did a PhD at SOAS, University of London. And my interest in tafsir ranges through historical aspects to also translating texts of tafsir, classical and more recent. The most famous of which, of course, is the great exegesis of Fakhruddin Ar-Razi, rahimahullah. So I have experience in how the challenges of understanding these texts and in translating the Quran itself through the lens of the Mufassirin. So in terms of Quran translation, I have experience, limited so far, but growing experience both as a researcher and a practitioner. So as a researcher, I have been in the past year or so a member of the team at the Global Quran Project in the University of Freiburg, Germany. So you can find some reviews that I've done on Quran translations if you visit my Twitter profile, and many of you might know me from there at Tafsir Doctor. So I have as my pinned tweet at the moment, just to make that easier for you, the thread of my short reviews of Quran translations. So as I've said here right at the beginning, this is not about promoting what are the best translations or what is the best translation. That particular description doesn't make a lot of sense to me in the work that I do, although I fully understand why people ask that. Um, I've drawn attention to different aspects of works in the field, some of which are very new, some of which are classics. So Muhammad Asad's, for example, and some of the more recent ones, and also this, which is a translation from tafsir, and some unusual kind of things which are in different, in chronological order, things like that. Ahmed Zaki Hamad's translation, which is recognized quite widely as one of the best. Um, Rhyming translations, translations of translations, many different things, word for word. And most recently in this thread, I've talked about Abdullah Yusuf Ali, who again is one of the most famous names in the field. So, as I've said, people want to know what is the best translation. And if they're not asking, they're telling you that such and such is the best translation. I'm not going to be looking at this particular publication in order to decide is it the best translation or not. Because mostly, among other reasons, mostly I assess things on an ayah by ayah basis. So if you ask me what is the best translation, I'll say which ayah, and then let's compare what has been done, and we'll think about the merits of each translation. And most importantly for me, it is about the root, the grounding of each translation in terms of tafsir. So that doesn't just mean the tafsir literature and the tafsir tradition, but tafsir itself is, a set of tools to analyze the Quranic text. So has the translator engaged in assessing the Quranic language in a way which led them to a good reading, good understanding, and then good rendering of the text into meaningful expressions in the target language, such as English. And of course, we want them also to be demonstrating awareness of the tafsir tradition. So, are they reading those works of tafsir? And are they letting us know that they are reading those works of tafsir? Can we see from the results that they're bringing out that they have actually been paying attention to that tafsir? Or do they just pay lip service to that? So, in looking at a lot of different translations as a researcher, I have found some interesting results, surprising results sometimes when assessing these questions. Um, I am also a practitioner of Quran translation through the Bayyina project, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. But my purpose today isn't to focus on comparison between what I'm doing or what our team is doing versus what Sheikh Nuh and the people he's worked with have done. But rather, I want to have a sort of first impression. And although I have looked inside this book before, I've tried to not look too deeply because I wanted to share my first impressions with you and sort of find things as I look. So once we take it out, we can see quickly that it is considerably weighty volume. It's got a good feel to it. The leather is nice. I must say I don't like these sort of stickers where it almost looks like laser printed paper on the front and back. I feel like it might smudge if my fingers were moist. Um, but I hope that's not the case. Once you open it up, you know it's nicely decorated and laid out. You've got some introductory information here. It tells you about how the Quranic text is by the pen of Uthman Taha, famous calligrapher, and taken from the King Fahd complex. So that's a really nice feature of this, that you've got the facing languages, and the Arabic text is very nice and clear. Some people were asking me about that. So I'll let you see that a bit more closely later on, inshallah. So it's definitely a pleasant volume to hold. And one other thing I would notice is on the front, we have got the name, of course, of the translator, as you'd understand. But on the back, we are told here about the process in which the translator studied the Quran with a traditional scholar in Jordan during the 15 years of the work. And at this point, that scholar is not named, and I'm not sure that he's named in the volume. We can, of course, find him named on the accompanying website. Oh, in fact, we do have him mentioned here, Sheikh Ali Hani Yusuf. He's also known as Sheikh Ali Hani Al Aqrabawi. He's got some of his own websites and YouTube channel and so on. But you could wonder, or you could question or suggest that perhaps it's a collaborative project and it could be both names mentioned on the front. But that's something I'm sure that there was an understanding between those involved. And of course, the translation itself is the responsibility of Nuh Keller. I happen to know Sheikh Ali a little bit. I had the opportunity to visit him a couple of times, and I sent him questions sometimes, and he's very generous with his answers and his help. So I'm looking forward to also discuss some of the aspects of the translation with him. As far as I understand, his English is very limited, so therefore we would understand that he would not be in the position to reassess the English once that part has been sort of taken to that stage and finalized. But he is involved certainly in the thinking behind the translation, so a stage before it is rendered into English. So that's actually what I'm most excited about with this project, and why I think it is something different from pretty much everything that we have out there, even though some things, or some translations are collaborations and some translations are marketed as collaborations. They are not usually collaborations of this type, where you have someone who is notably an expert in tafsir like Sheikh Ali Hani, and someone who is bringing his own scholarship and expertise, as well as the strengths of being a native English speaker and fluent and eloquent in English. So that kind of collaboration, it's exciting to see what will come out of it. And also what we get from the references to tafsir and also the collaboration is the issue of transparency. I think it's important, especially nowadays and as time goes on, that as readers, we get the chance to see what's going on in the thinking process of the translator. That is mostly missing from translations that we read, including in book form. And when they're digitized, that's something that I'm trying to improve and think about how to improve it in the work that I do with Quran Foundation, which is the the body behind Quran.com and other important websites. But the fact is, we usually don't get a chance to understand how the translator reached their conclusions. Sometimes they give us footnotes. One of the most transparent in that regard is Muhammad Asad, who often tells us that he has taken such and such point from the tafsir of Zamakhshari or the tafsir al-Razi or others. Um, and what's good about that is you can actually go back and look at the tafsirs and you can understand the justification for his point. And sometimes, and you know that I read al-Razi very closely, sometimes I find that, well, I actually disagree with Muhammad Asad in how he read al-Razi. So you have, from the highest level, or the starting point is the Quran itself and its text, and then you have then the mufassirin and the exegetes who are commenting on that text in Arabic. Then you have translators who come along who are understanding the Quranic text and often mediated through the mufassirin. And then you have people like myself in my role as a researcher, where I will assess the translations, assess what the translator has done and how has the translator understood the Quranic text, how has the translator understood the text given by the mufassirin. So I would say that in this project, in terms of what's published, transparency is not there in the volume that we have, because there are no footnotes. We do have many aspects, as we'll see, which are in a way added to the text, and the translator has avoided using brackets or other methods of parenthesis to signal that he's added things in, which typically translators would consider to be the kind of thing to put between brackets, right? So we'll see examples of that, and think about the reasons behind that and the relative merits of different approaches. But the transparency actually comes from, and I'll show you this now, the fact that they have a website. So if we go here to, I could go right to the beginning of the site, but Quran Beheld tafsir.com is a repository in which there are audio files. So let's go back to the home to have a look at this. We have got audio files of the discussions between Sheikh Nuh and Sheikh Ali, right? So it's a recording of the second reading that they did together over a period of 8 years. It's being edited. So far, we have got recordings up to Surah 4. So I haven't really listened to these yet, but I'm actually particularly excited about this material because hearing Sheikh Ali going through the different possibilities in the text and different things that have been said about them, and giving his own view as to what are the best ways to understand out of all of that. All of that will be very valuable to me as a tafsir researcher and as a translator, because that can provide the basis and the kind of source code upon which future translations can be built. So even if a translator doesn't agree with Sheikh Ali's final conclusion, they'll be very informed by the process. And as I understand, it seems from what they say on the website that they'll also be posting in text format the commentary, which I assume the Arabic commentary that underpins it. So in that way, if you see the website as a companion website to the book itself, then we would actually have a very, very rich resource and a great deal of transparency, so that we understand the rationale behind all that has been published therein. So after a few pages and a preface about the Quran, we have this important introduction, which is titled The Once and Future Hermeneutic. I haven't read it in detail and in full, again, just so that I could share some initial impressions of that with you. Let me see how many pages this spans. It's about 23 pages as it appears in the PDF here. So we'll take a little skim of this together because I want to give you some idea about how I read it as a tafsir researcher, because I think we all might have slightly different impressions of what the translator is trying to do and get across to you. By the way, you can actually on this website listen to it in audio format. Sheikh Noor himself has narrated it if you want to hear it in his voice. So, tomorrow's translators and others interested in how and why the English in this work differs from previous renderings can read on. And I like that. Right from the beginning, he's saying tomorrow's translators. He's thinking along the lines that I like a translator to think that they have not finished the job. They have not taken us to the finish line and perfected the whole thing, but rather they have done something worth doing. And that's what I think. Sometimes you question with translations that are published, you find that they haven't really added anything. Maybe they did that and they benefited for themselves. That's okay. But translations, you when they're going to come into the market, and if we're supposed to spend money on buying them, you want them to have done something new, perhaps taking the same methods before but applying them better in some way, or trying a new method, a new angle, a new approach. And sometimes that new angle and approach you're not claiming is the angle and approach that everyone should take, but you're just saying, well, what would it be like if we did some rhyming in the translation? Let's see how that looks. What would happen if we were to be extra literal in order to bring out some of the surprising aspects of Quranic rhetoric, for example, right? So let's see how the argument is made here for this translation. So he talks a little bit about his own background and his experience with different types of scholars, and how he came to know Sheikh Ali in particular, and what he's impressed about with Sheikh Ali Hani. He's talking here about the importance of knowing the Arabic language and what is actually involved in knowing Arabic, right? Not in a very superficial way, but understanding, the mechanics of Arabic, you can say. And that is both in terms of the codified rules, and perhaps more importantly, the kind of the natural way of speech of the Arabs at the time of revelation. The translator believes such knowledge is unlikely to be found in a single individual, also endowed with an English aesthetic that might convey it. Right, so that's why this collaboration has come about. Right, so they've explained how they've done this collaboration. The Sheikh teaching on his low table of open books, the student writing the translation in pencil and tiny letters, asking questions. Asking questions is extremely important. I'm a huge enthusiast of asking questions. In fact, it is the basis of tafsir. Tafsir is answers to questions, and that's something that I've been arguing at length. Various mufassirin have been, drawn upon in some detail. Many are mentioned here of different eras and different schools. These are not mentioned in any discernible order, I have to say. It's not alphabetical. It's certainly not chronological. That was my first assumption. So there are biographical notes appended immediately after the main body. Okay, so there is something of that nature at the end of the translation. So they repeated it and they worked very hard, recorded everything. And then the translator's wife, Sahel, re-listened to the recorded sessions, checked the English text word for word, gave corrections and advice. So they went back to Sheikh Ali for further checking. So this is very good, and sets a good kind of example for how rigor is done. Not to make too fine a point of it, but when I was mentioning about how there's a decision made about who's mentioned on the cover, who's not mentioned on the cover, it is often women who are mentioned sort of somewhere in the introduction. They are often part of the process. I've seen some translations where somebody's name is on the cover, but then they say the actual translation was done by so and so, and it often is a woman. But the person whose name on the cover did far less. I'm not suggesting that's the case here. I'm just drawing attention to things that we need to pay attention to sometimes when we are attributing publications like this to translators. Then they've compared also with some earlier translations. They try to avoid that in the first place. Um, let's see if they listed them right here or just a little bit later. So the 6 translations chosen had been among the best, but wanting to know how general such gaps in meaning were in previous translations, the translator contacted Professor Ahmed Khan. Yes, who I received an email from recently. May Allah preserve him and give him success. He's preparing an article for journal publication, and he was covering the whole sweep of previous English translations. Right, so this is just talking about some of the rigor that was applied in checking and comparing. But I think it's important that the translator himself didn't want to be too influenced by previous translations. So he wanted to bring something fresh, and I think that's something that we also appreciate as readers. That when you look through the translations, and I often do that in a very broad comparative way, look at 60 or 70 translations, of a single ayah next to each other in digital format, you see that very often they're just using the same word or same a couple of options, but you find some of them went with this word, some of them went with that word, but they're probably borrowing from each other or influenced by each other to some extent. So when you find someone has perhaps gone back to the drawing board, thought about it from first principles, come up with a different word which they feel expresses the meaning of the Arabic very well, but perhaps nobody before them used that word in English before, this really adds something to the corpus of Quran translations. So then he goes through a number of points which he finds that earlier translations have completely failed to get right. My first impression of this is maybe this is going to be a bit of an overstatement, because ultimately these things will be treated well and badly by earlier translations to various extents, right? But to sort of suggest that these things are completely overlooked seems to me a bit difficult to establish in the first place. It's proving a negative. So the first of these is mentioned about thumma. Thumma has a number of different usages. By the way, I have translated also part of Imam Suyuti's Itqan, in particular chapter 40, which talks about adawat. And that is a summary of Ibn Hisham's Mughni al-Labib and Kutub al-A'arib. And that book is there for giving you the meanings of these various particles and similar, and showing how they are used in different ayat. So inshallah, when that's published, I hope it'll provide more detail on the kind of thing that Sheikh Noor is drawing attention to here. So traditional scholars describe different meanings of thumma, sometimes for time, sometimes in slightly different ways, or in rank, or mentioning one thing after the other, etc. So the combined forms are common, not rare. The intent of these verses is not adequately conveyed by using the English words then or and, which are superficial. So the idea here is we need some other words in English to make clear exactly what a word like thumma is denoting. The emphatic indefinite. So Allah sent a crow, ghuraban. The word crow is indefinite. So when a thing is made definite or indefinite in the Arabic language, and this is talked about in Ilm al-Ma'ani, one of the branches of Arabic rhetoric, these things have different kinds of effect, and that's what's listed here. So the nakira, for example, the indefinite can be for plentitude or for fewness, which is the opposite, for might or exaltedness, or for contempt, which is the opposite. So all of this is very context-based, to understand why something is being used in a certain way. And I don't know if it's mentioned here, but I would add that It is normally when something comes in a form that you wouldn't expect, when it somehow bucks the norm. Then you ask, well, why was it made indefinite when we would have expected it to be definite here, or vice versa? So these are combinations of tankir found in the body of the translation. Missing this emphatic indefinite is probably the greatest single leak of meaning and nuance in prior English translations. I have a hard time agreeing with the statement, but all seem to have made a false analogy between modern written Arabic, which no longer uses the indefinite for such purposes, and the Arabic of the Quran, which everywhere does. Okay. So, I mean, my level of agreement of this will depend on to what extent what he's saying is really being emphasized in the tafsir, and which nakiras are we talking about. Reversed masculine and feminine forms, sometimes feminine verbs with actions of men, or feminine endings on otherwise masculine nouns. Um, so that can be for various purposes as well, and is quite subtle and likely to be missed by earlier translators. Okay, so you can see the kind of thing that he's saying, and highlighting that he will be paying attention to, right? So by giving attention to these things, some additional value is added by this translation that was not brought in previous ones. That is the argument being made, and then we would then have to assess the translation on the basis of this mission statement that's being set out at the beginning. Zamakhshari treats it in some places in his tafsir, though the best to exposit it is al-Biqa'i. Okay. Demonstrative pronouns for respect or contempt, such as using هذا or هذه or ذلك, تلك, هؤلاء, أولئك, etc. For different purposes again. So what I'm observing so far is these are all various categories which fall under roughly the same sort of thing. So they're falling under the category of subtleties in the use of certain adawat, the likes of pronouns, the likes of masculine and feminine. So this reminds me a little bit about some things mentioned in chapter 42 of Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran, which also I translated, which is about qawa'id, which a mufassir has to know. So they say, these are some things pertaining to pronouns, these are some things pertaining to definite and indefinite, these are some things pertaining to masculine and feminine, and some rules which apply, which a mufassir must pay attention to. So, I have some sympathy for saying these are things which a translator should pay attention to. The question that arises always is, to what extent can you really carry over these things into English or any other language? And, it depends on the specific language as well. But to what extent can English cope with the things that we want to reflect from the original text? So I'm all for having a kind of husn al-dhann of the English language, because what often happens is people say, well, the Quran is untranslatable anyway. All this stuff, these subtleties are untranslatable anyway. So why bother, right? So that's why some people even were, and have been, and maybe still are, against the idea of translation at all, because they say it's impossible. You're not going to manage it, so why bother? But for those who want to actually undertake it and want to endeavor to translate in the best way, then they should say, well, I'm going to find whatever means I can to convey these subtleties in English, while knowing that there are some things I just won't be able to do. So maybe I can mark that down for my readers and let them know this is something I didn't manage to convey, but I would like you to know that it's there in the Arabic. Or ask them to go ahead and read the detailed Arabic commentaries to find those things. Chronology, قبل من قبل بعد من بعد. So some of the subtleties of their usage and their variation. So this is also something which can be distinguished if you want to pay attention to it. A newest translation requires a feel for the nuances of originals. So then this work, min asrari huruf al-jar, has been mentioned before and in the tafsirs. And ma'ani nahu is mentioned here, by Fadl Samarra'i, who is indeed an excellent scholar of the current time. Plurals of paucity and plenitude. So we have جمع القلة and جمع الكثرة. So when these vary, then they can also be varied, perhaps, in translation. Arabic lexicology and etymology. So this is perhaps where, the one which stands out to me so far as the most important point, from the title at least. With previous translations, there's an over-reliance on English-Arabic dictionaries, previous translators, or even biblical renderings. But we should look at the Arabic roots and how they are derived from those roots, and their usage. So the word Jannah, in the lush shaded grove of paradise. So just the word Al-Jannah has given you all this, in which the root meaning of the term Jannah signifies a grove of trees whose shade is so dense it blocks out. That's the word Jannah, is to cover and conceal all sunlight. Now a garden, the invariable rendering, which is also biblical, unless it is more neglected than most, seldom reaches above chest level, so does not bear the Quranic implication very well. So, I'm not sure how I feel about this complaint. Um, in a garden, things don't reach above here, so it doesn't work for the word Jannah. And then, are we always going to use, because the word Jannah is very frequent in the Quran, is this something which, I assume he's going to use at every juncture. And there are different Jannat in the Quran, not only of paradise. So presumably other places he will say something like lush shaded grove. Anyway, so this is all explained. It's an understandable strategy. But I'm saying that there may be good reasons, I suppose, why other translators might say, well, I'm not going to follow you in that. Nuzulan is often rendered as everlasting hospitality, etc. But it is better understood, as the tafsirs say, as the first round is the thing that's offered to a guest when he or she arrives. Jahannam derives from horrific depth or menacing frown. So he is translated as glowering hell abyss. So knowing this, this concern of Sheikh Nuh, we would then be able to better understand certain things that we're going to encounter in the translation. The word mar for a man is derived from muru'a. Okay, even a very able man. Let's see then. Women is not just okay. So these are some worthwhile points to ponder on. I will look at the one from Surah Yusuf, because we're going to look at Surah Yusuf. That's what we're going to spend the larger part of this video doing, inshallah. So he says that it's used exclusively for bad, hard, or lean years. So it's not just the elapsing, but it's used exclusively for bad, hard, or lean years. So when Joseph says, you are to diligently sow for 7 hard years, and whatever you reap, leave in its ear, save for a little of which you eat. And then he says, then you will have amun fihi yughathun nas, so an excellent year. So this can also be borne out by discussions around the ayah of Nuh alayhi salam, right? Qadam as-sidqin. Okay, let's try to get soon to the end of this introduction so we can have a look at the translation itself. Of penitent, munib, tazakka, the hypocrites. Okay, he mentions here, I'm very glad to see, Muhammad Hassan Jabal's 4-volume Mu'jam Ishtiqaqi. That's a work which is very important to me, and I haven't actually really looked at Mustafawi's work. I'm aware of it, but Jabal's work is something that I do give a lot of attention to. So this is a whole discussion about how they have reached this translation of as though they were a bunch of fair-seeming great planks of wood, worm-rotten inside, left sitting for useless against the wall. Left sitting for useless. I have a feeling there's a typo here. I might compare this then with what's in the translation itself. So I'm going to open up at 63.4 just to check this. Of course, typos happen, especially in the first edition of a work. So he has here, left sitting for useless against the wall. Something doesn't seem right in that for me. كأنهم خشب مسندة. That's it. So all of these subtleties have been brought out from the root. So really, you can have a discussion or argument about how many of these things that are in the root meaning have to then be put into the translation. But when you understand that that's the methodology being followed, you would understand what it is that you're encountering when you read the work. Right, what the preceding 7 points mean. The often considerable meaning gaps in previous translations seem due to having turned a blind eye toward traditional Muslim exegetical, etymological, and lexicographical literature. I share this complaint. Translators, even when they tell you that they are using tafsirs, often show you that they are not really using them heavily. Okay? Translators of the future may know better. Outstanding interpretive problems and solutions. So there are some problems which he says have been solved by the translation, and some are tentative and wait for better solutions from future translators. So he's talked here about the companion website, the Quran Beheld tafsir, and then some things which he feels have not been fully resolved. The use of the word, whichever translation of the word Rabb, maybe not satisfactory. How to deal with ellipsis, the use of a dash. I'm going to show you a good example from Surat Yusuf, inshallah, where I appreciate something that they have noted there. Okay, another difficult term to render is ayah. Indeed. Dhallam. Different solutions have been offered by major figures of tafsir, but none fits all 5 contexts where this word appears in the Quran. But this one. Okay. The translation also attempts to convey to the reader through the cadence, feeling, and sound of the English something of the sheer force of the many emphatics found in virtually every verse of the Quran. So this is something also that Ustad Nu'man and I, in our collaboration, the Bayina translation, we do give a lot of attention to. And I believe we pay attention to the things that have been mentioned before, the 7 points, but I'm going to make a renewed intention to look at those more closely as a future translation, as a future translator, as we've been invited by Sheikh Noor here to be. But when it comes to mu'akkidat, our approach is to say, well, if you've got something like inna in the Arabic text, we want, to convey the effect of that in the English. But we would definitely sway away from supplying a word like verily or indeed. Indeed is not really the right word to use there. Anyway, verily might be, but it's very archaic. So instead, we would say, how do we find a way in English to convey emphasis in a way that's natural to English? Let's see what he mentions about it. With a view towards sound too, the present text has been typeset in the only way the translator felt it could. So we're going to see the way that it's chunked into phrases and centered on the page. And I think that is quite an effective choice, personally. To summarize everything, the ijaz of the Quran remains. The divine cannot be reduced to the human. It is not, strictly speaking, a translation of the Quran. And by this, he does not mean just the pious disclaimer, which is common. By the way, I noticed if you open up the translation from the back, then we've got some Arabic introduction, and instead of the Quran Beheld, it says Al Quran Al Mashhud, and then it says ترجمة إنجليزية لمعاني القرآن الكريم. So we have got this usual thing of, or very common thing of, it is an English translation of the meanings of the Noble Quran. And that to me is always amusing and frustrating as well. In the English, they've just said an English translation from the Arabic. It doesn't say an English translation of the meanings of the Arabic. So I don't know the reason why they've chosen to say this in Arabic. ترجمة المعاني. Oftentimes people explain this by saying, well, this is to make it clear that no translation is perfect, right? But of course, every tarjama has to go via ma'ani. There's no such thing as the sort of theoretical thing that's mentioned in ulum al-Quran works like Manahil al-Irfan of Sheikh al-Zurqani, where they say there's a tarjama harfiya versus tarjama ma'nawiya. In translation studies, this is not how it's talked about at all. There's no such thing in reality as just translating the words with no i'tibar or no consideration of the meanings. All translation is mediated through meanings. Therefore, what do they want by saying translation of the meanings? They want to say it's just to remind you of the fact that it's an imperfect translation. But I don't think that's the way to do it. If you say it's translation of the meanings, you're actually making a bigger claim. You're saying that you have encompassed the meanings of the Quran and then you've translated those. So in fact, you've said, I've not only translated one meaning from each verse, I've translated all the meanings of the Quran. And of course, that's not what the person is intending to say when they say Tarjumat al-Ma'ani, but that's me just putting out this warning so that people maybe reconsider using this way of talking. But Sheikh Nuh says here, comparing the Arabic original side by side is probably the best way to see what has been done. A literary form that enables readers to grasp the meaning, fill in the ellipses, and most of all follow the divine plan and theme of each surah. To the best of the translator's effort and knowledge, everything found on each page represents the meaning and intention of its divine author, explicitly or implicitly, etc., etc. The occasionally added glosses or words of exegesis from reliable authorities are things the text could not be understood without, out of his conviction that the essence of good translation lies in clarity, making the very point the author is making in any given passage, no matter how few or many words it may take. So the things which are added in without brackets, because there are no brackets, the translator feels they are there in the text. They're not explicit in the text, but they're somehow there. That would be separate from certain other levels of tafsir, which are things which are not in the text, but are supplementary information, such as people's names, for example. Right, so these are just some guides to how to read. The existential question that underpins it all is how should I be as a person? But there is a Quranic index for specific topics. The hermeneutic that works will probably always have something to do with the Quranic paradigm of personal word-by-word talaqqi, the traditional teacher-based instruction of Islam, with the teacher being a part of the greater interpretive community. And I like that emphasis on interpretive community, because that's sometimes missing when people want to engage in novel interpretation and they want to be mavericks in tafsir. Even if you are if you feel qualified to have independent opinions in tafsir, I'm perfectly okay with that in principle. But you should be able to argue your case amongst learned people, and they should at least see that your ijtihad, if you can put it in that way, is valid. So that brings us to the end of the introduction. And what I want to do with you is share a little bit. I'm going to use a different method of sharing now, whereby we will look more closely at the book itself. So I'm aware that this might be slightly out of focus, and I'm not sure I can do much to improve that. But, of course, if you want to see it in full, crisp clarity, you should purchase a copy of the book. So let's start by having a look at Surat Al-Fatiha, because of course, after the introduction, we've got a section of the themes of surahs. This is very good, very important for us to have an awareness of what each surah is basically about and what the main things are covered. Very brief here, which is good. And then we've got opening the Fatiha. In the name of Allah, most merciful and compassionate. Just make this a little bit better. All praise is Allah's, Lord of all worlds of beings. Most merciful and compassionate, Master of the Day of Reckoning. You alone we humbly adore, and in you alone we seek help. Guide us the straight way, the way of those you have divinely blessed, who have not then incurred wrath or utterly lost the way. So the accompanying commentary, I assume, is already on the website that I showed you, QuranBeheldTafsir.com. But I'm not looking at that. I've not listened to that yet. But I can see already the reasoning and the basis behind some of these choices, which I can mention to you in brief. My job, of course, is not my place to defend this translation or advocate for it as such. But I do want you to understand what's going on, because I see a certain value in the fact that the translator has brought out things which clearly do come from the Mufassirin. So all praise is Allah's, Lord of all worlds of beings. That's a way of dealing with the word al-alameen, where in a way he's combined a couple of different approaches to that word, a couple of different opinions, and brought them together in this translation. Most merciful and compassionate. It's very difficult to deal with Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. I don't think that this rendering is any better than the typical, and it would be interesting to see the thought process in choosing it. Master of the Day of Reckoning, that's extremely typical. You alone we humbly adore. Now, this is something that people already asked me about. They queried and found strange. I don't think of it as strange. I think what's happened, why it seems strange to some people, is we've got used to certain words in translation. We've got used to the word worship being used for ibadah, and that's fine. But it's not a given that the word ibadah maps to the word worship, and that's the end of the story. Adoration is another word of worship. I know that we also use the word adore in very different ways, just for love, but also even in the definition of ibadah, some of the scholars say that it is the epitome of khudu' and also the epitome of hub, right? So it is humility and love to their utmost extents. So humbly adore, then you can see how he gets to that meaning. And in you alone we seek help, guide us the straight way. So the missing particle, if you like, you see, you don't have ihdina ila as-sirat al-mustaqim, but you've got ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. So likewise in the English, he said, guide us the straight way. And that is slightly awkward, I think, in English, but perhaps the translator felt that awkwardness is merited and helps you to grasp what's going on in the Arabic. The way of those you have divinely blessed, who have not then incurred wrath. So this is actually a clearer rendering of one of the ways to understand the way غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ relates to what preceded. Right? So from this you understand more clearly, and if I'm not mistaken, this would be the opinion that غَيْر is in the position of sifa. So those whom you have divinely blessed, and then from that group of all the ones who are أَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ, who have not fallen into these other categories, right? So then this is a sifa of those الَّذِينَ أَنْعَمْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ, right? So translations kind of go either way. but this is a clearer way of rendering one of the ways to understand it in the Arabic language, because it can be sifa or badal, as the Mufassirin say. I'm not sure about this. You have divinely blessed. Um, maybe it's is there a distinction made here between divine blessing and another kind of blessing? Um, but in the Quran, of course, ni'mah is not only divine blessing. I'm going to go now to Surat Yusuf, chapter of Joseph. And the reason for that is I've done a lot of work on this surah, researching it. I've translated Tafsir al-Razi of this surah. It's not yet published. Um, I worked on it with Ustad Nu'man for the Bayyina commentary and then the Bayyina translation. Although we didn't finish Surat Yusuf, we made it a good way through. So all the various statements of the Mufassirin are quite fresh in my mind, and for that reason I thought it'll be worth seeing how these various things are rendered. So I'm going to read through it as well and just draw attention to a few things here and there where I say a few, but probably quite a lot of things where I either appreciate something or I've got a query or point of disagreement, perhaps, in my personal opinion. And as I say this, these are first impressions. Um, I have sort of skimmed this translation of Surat Yusuf already, but I haven't read it closely. There are some things which might, I might query now, but then later on I might become convinced of it if I were to hear the reasoning. And as I say, they haven't yet published the source code audio files for Surat Yusuf. In the name of Allah, most merciful and compassionate, Alif Lam Ra. These are the verses of the surpassing clear book. So Al-Mubin, no doubt, is clear, can also be clarifying. So in our translation, we said clear and clarifying. Here is the surpassing clear book. So I'm not sure entirely why. Maybe there's a sense that it has sort of gone clear of other books and surpassed them. But that's not a meaning that I've encountered in tafsir personally. Verily did we send it down, an Arabic Quran that haply you may comprehend. So we can see that the translator is not shying away from archaic kind of expressions in English. Haply is not used um, commonly in current speech. We recount in detail to you the most beautiful of accounts by inspiring you this Quran, while ever before it you had been of those who knew them not. So I suppose this would be an example of what he's mentioned in the introduction about min qablihi, right? When kunta min qablihi, while ever before it. So he's paying attention to what is denoted by the qabl and the min qabl in particular. When Joseph said to his father, "My beloved father, truly I have beheld 11 great stars." I suppose the great stars is coming from it being uh, indefinite, right? Otherwise, I can't see why, unless maybe the word kaukab is used for a great star, whereas najm is used for a not so great star. I'm not sure, but one of these reasonings, I suppose, applies. And the sun and moon, I saw them bowing down to me. He said, and you can see here, by the way, how nicely the Arabic text is laid out. And this will make for a pleasant reading experience, I think, this type of layout. He said, "My dear young son, relate not your dream to your brethren, lest they lay you great guile. Verily the devil is to man an open foe. Even thus shall your Lord choose you, and shall teach to you of what dreams portend, and crown his blessings upon you and the house of Jacob, as he did upon your two forefathers not so long before, Abraham and Isaac." So here again, not so long before, but the word again is min qabl, right? كما أتمها على أبويك من قبل إبراهيم وإسحاق. But here the difference is not so long before versus ever before it. That is to say, all the way up until this point. So that's telling you then that it's not that min qabl has a particular denotation compared to qabl, but it is very contextual. It is very much contextual. So That's what the translators have to pay attention to. There's a danger in being too formulaic and saying, well, put this in your Quranic glossary and your translation toolkit, that whenever you see min qabl, it should be translated like this. Whenever you see qabl without the min, it should be translated like that. You know, you have to be flexible. You pay attention to the context, and of course the tafsirs as well, which are paying attention to context. Where do we get to? Truly in Joseph and his brethren are a multitude of mighty signs, ayat, for any who ask. When they said, truly Joseph and his brother are more beloved to our father than we, though we are a single solid group of men, verily our father is plainly wrong. Slay Joseph. And by the way, so I don't say this as a criticism, but just to give a simple example here, is plainly wrong. That's fine as a translation, but you see here, if we wanted to, we could get very into the fact that we have lafi ضلال mubin, and then so the fi is in. So if you wanted to, you could focus on the way the particle is used here, the preposition is used, and then we could say, oh, but this translation then is completely insufficient. This is part of the problem of critiquing translations. It really depends what we're looking for. I only say that because in a way I felt like in the introduction, the translator has sort of done that towards earlier translations and talked about how sort of hopelessly they have handled certain things. But when we get into it, then we see that, well, it's very, very hard to cover everything. And if you overcover certain things, you can then sort of miss the wood for the trees, or you obscure something else which was very important to make clear. Slay Joseph or cast him away hopelessly far lost in the land, and the face of your father will be free for you. And once he is gone, you may be thoroughly righteous men. So I like part of this, but a query here. أَوِطْرَحُوهُ أَرْضًا. Ardan, by the way, is indefinite. But we have here, slay Joseph or cast him away hopelessly far lost in the land. So if we were supposed to be paying attention to definite and indefinite, then I think this is a good place to do it. And again, not to say that our translation is necessarily right or superior or anything like that. But in the Bayina translation, we have said, this is ayah number 9. Kill Joseph or toss him away somewhere. So how we understood Ardan was like some land or other, some place. But some place is a bit American. So I've argued then for a translation which might be easier for a global audience. So hopelessly far lost in the land, there's clearly a lot being read out of the word itrahuhu or in the word ardan, but it's not clear to me exactly how it's coming from that. One of them who spoke said, slay not Joseph, but throw him into the darkest depths of the earth-dug cistern, and he will be found and picked up by a journeying caravan of merchants, if do you must. Now this is very interesting because, of course, typically this is not called earth-dug cistern, it's called the well. And, the is coming from, al-jub, right? في غيابة الجب. But, if you look into the meaning of jub, you would find the Mufassirin tell you that it is a well that has been dug but hasn't yet been lined. So I suppose that's the origin of this earth-dug cistern. But it's certainly not an easy expression. It sort of makes you scratch your head a little bit, I think, as a reader. The word cistern has other associations for me, perhaps for you as well. So we have to really think about what word to use. In the Bayina translation, so far as it is, we have just used the word well because we didn't feel there was a strong justification for distinguishing what kind of well. But maybe there is. They said, our father, how can you not trust Joseph to us when we mean him nothing but well? So we did this as well. Pun intended in the translation, pun not intended in what I just said as well. We mean him nothing but well. Of course, they meant to throw him in the well. But for Sheikh Nuh, it's not a well, it's a cistern. So I don't know. Of course, punning in English, can be a bit gratuitous, but the argument can be made for it by saying the brothers themselves were betraying their true intentions in some of their words and in some of their inflections. So, by sort of indicating that in the translation in other ways, you are compensating for something that's lost in the other ayat. So we mean him nothing but well. Let him go with us tomorrow, and he will eat and play while we guard him well. He said, it grieves me deeply that you should take him away, and I fear a wolf may devour him. Well, what's interesting here is that, again, in the Arabic is adhib, but it's quite difficult to translate this as the wolf because it raises certain questions, and the Mufassirin did, of course, consider those questions and the reasons for it being called the wolf rather than a wolf, right? So, they said, verily should a wolf devour him when we are a solid group of men combined, that's the same expression from earlier, basically, we would be good for nothing at all. That's one of the ways to understand inna idhal khasirun. So when they took him away with them and concerted to put him in the darkest depths of the cistern, dash. Now this is very good and generally missed by translators. So as I told you before, sometimes there's something which is elliptical. So we have lamma, falamma dhahabu, when they set out. Lamma should have a jawab, a consequence, an apodosis, right? So falamma dhahabu bihi, it's not wa ajma'u because the waw prevents it from being the apodosis. And also wa awhayna, the waw prevents it being the apodosis. But many translations will make this the apodosis, and there might be some argument for it in tafsir, but basically we should assume when they took him away with them and concerted to put him in the darkest depths of the cistern, something happened which is not going to be spelled out to you here. Why is it not being spelled out? Because something so horrific happened that it is beyond words, something which is best left, in your imagination. So that's all sort of contained in that dash. And we also spotted this. We put 3 dots. Maybe the dash is good. And we aspired unto him, you shall verily give them tidings of this heinous thing they have done when they have no idea it is even you. That's one of the understandings. So again, okay, as all translations have to make a choice, there are different ways to understand a lot of these expressions. وَهُمْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. Is it referring to the time of the iha that's being done, or is it the time of them not recognizing him, or the time of him telling them about what they have done? And they came to their father at nightfall weeping. They said, our father, verily we went off. See, verily, we went off racing wildly against each other and left Joseph with our things, and a wolf ate him. So a dhib. Here it would be sort of even more pertinent to say the wolf, because if we've got a question mark over why it was the wolf before, here it's almost like the wolf that you were afraid of, right, has eaten him. While you would not believe us, were we utterly truthful. And they brought lying blood on his gown. This is quite a nice rendering of this very, very interesting expression in Arabic. He said, rather your hearts have made plausible to you a heinous thing, so mine is patient grace. Interesting. So patient grace, not graceful patience. I think we've called it graceful patience, but you see, sabrun jamil, the sabr is the mawsuf, and the jamil is the sifa. So graceful patience is what you expect. So I'm interested to know why has it become here patient grace. And Allah is the unfailing help against what you describe. And a caravan of merchants came and sent ahead their water drawer, and he let down his pail. He said, joy betide us, this is a fine boy. هذا غلام. So maybe the nakira of ghulamun is what's inspired fine boy. And they hid him fast with them as merchandise, and Allah well knew what they were doing, and they eagerly sold him for a pittance of his worth, a handful of dirhams counted out, and they were little desirous of keeping him. I'm not sure about the eagerly. Is it something he's getting from Sharauhu? I don't see where that's coming from, the eagerly. You can certainly understand eagerly from وَكَانُوا فِيهِ مِنَ الزَّاهِدِينَ, but then that's covered here in this part of the translation. So where do we get eagerly? I mean, if someone wants to answer these questions in future, that you're most welcome to. As I say, these are questions that I'm having basically on the first time of reading this text. And he who purchased him from Egypt said to his wife, make noble his lodging. Haply he will benefit us, or we may take him as a son. Even thus were we to establish for Joseph in the land. Okay, so establish for Joseph, you have this expression, makkanahu versus makkana lahu. And in one of the early verses of Surah Al-An'am, they come together. So typically it is said that they mean the same thing. But here he has, in a way, indicated a role for the lamb, which is perhaps open to debate. Establish for Joseph as opposed to establish Joseph in the land, and that we might teach him of the portent of dreams. And Allah invariably gains his way, but most men know not. So he's sticking with the sort of classical way of rendering nas as men, as opposed to people, humans, humankind, etc. And when he reached the prime of his manhood, we bestowed him great judgment and knowledge. We bestowed him great judgment. Yeah, I think that you can use it as a transitive verb directly. And thus we requite those who surpass in good. And she in whose house he was sought to seduce him, and she locked up all doors and said, Hi to me. He said, Allah be my refuge. Truly my master has made my lodgings generously fair. Verily those who wrong others never succeed. Right? So obviously there are things which, hi to me. These are, it's difficult to know what to do with that exactly. When you look into the tafsir and the origins of it, the etymology. But anyway, it come to me. She was dying for him, as he would have been for her had he not seen the sovereign proof of his Lord of his utter vileness. Even thus we did to keep the appalling from him and foul indecency. Verily he was of our servants made purely sincere. Al-Mukhlasin, and in the other reading Al-Mukhlisin, so in a way it has been combined here, made purely sincere. Not to say that he was intending to combine the two qira'as, but both of those meanings can come from Al-Mukhlasin by itself. Right, this one I really do query. She was dying for him. I haven't seen a reason in tafsir from my readings personally that would turn hum into dying for someone. But perhaps there's something in the etymology which has led him to that way of doing it. I find it a bit overblown, personally. And each of them raced to be first to the door. Oh, by the way, we rendered it as she wanted him for sure. And each of them raced to be first to the door, and she rent his gown down the back, and they suddenly confronted her lord at the outer door. She said, no requital is there. So he's reading ma as nafia. No requital is there for him who means ill to your wife, but prison or a painful chastisement. He said, she sought to seduce me, and a witness from her own family attested, if his gown has been rent down the front, she has told the truth, and he is of the liars. But if his gown has been rent down the back, she has lied, and he is of the truthful. So when he saw his gown had been rent down the back, the master said, verily it is of the guile of your womankind. By the way, the master, and this might happen in a few other places, has been supplied in the translation, whereas in the text itself, sometimes it's left unstated and sometimes it's ambiguous. But this is certainly a reasonable way of reading it. Verily it is of the guile of your womankind. Truly, O women, your guile is great indeed. Joseph, ignore this whole thing. And you, ask God's forgiveness for your sin. Verily, you were of the willful doers of wrong. Now, I think this translation is lacking because, if we realize that some things have to be supplied, the guile of your womankind, that's supplied in the translation. It's not made explicit in kaydikunna. Inna kaydakunna. There's no oh women. These things are added for clarity. But look here, Joseph, ignore this whole thing, and you ask God's forgiveness. Who is you here? The way I read it out, you'd probably get the understanding that it is somebody else that's not Joseph. And you might put two and two together and realize it is his wife that he's talking to. And indeed, that is the case. But you see, in Arabic, that's much clearer. يوسف أعرض عن هذا واستغفري لذنبك. So the switch to feminine is what signals that. If it hadn't been there, of course, you would have understood it was still referring to Yusuf, right? Yusuf أعرض عن هذا واستغفر لذنبك, right? But واستغفري, the fact of the feminine is what makes you realize that a switch has taken place. But here, we don't have that because English doesn't do that very well, right? In the second person. So he just says, and you ask God's forgiveness for your sin. So here you probably need something to make that a bit clearer. Let me tell you what we did in our translation. We said, Joseph, put all this behind you, and you, woman, must apologize for your shameful deed. Because that's the way he's speaking to his wife at this point. And some ladies spitefully spread about in the city. The wife of the vizier seeks to seduce her young bondsman. She is rent to the depths of her heart with love. Verily, we see her plainly astray. I think there's something lacking here, and she is rent to because قَدْ شَغَفَهَا حُبًّا. The verb here, شَغَفَهَا, is attributed actually to Yusuf or to the Fata. They're saying he has done something to her in love. So you don't get that when you read this translation. She is rent to the depths of her heart with love. Let me just see how we've translated that. Love for him has really taken over her heart. So yeah, we also in a way have failed to attribute it to Joseph, but it's the for him at least makes that link, right? Whereas she is rent to the depths of her heart with love. It doesn't mention him at all in that phrase. She no sooner heard of their malicious wiles than she sent for them and prepared them fine seating to recline and partake from, and gave each of them a knife. And she said, go out unto them. All right. So we understand she said, ukhruj, to a male. So we understand that immediately from the Arabic that she's speaking to him. She said, go out unto them. And when they beheld him, they were stunned by him and sliced their hands badly. قطعنا, presumably it's the tashdid here, the tad'if, the doubling, gemination, which is what gets you the badly. And said, nothing is beyond the power of God. This is no mere human being. This is no less than a noble angel. She said, that is whom you blamed me about. And truly did I seek to seduce him, but he held out the more. Now if he will not do as I command, he shall surely be imprisoned and be of the helplessly abased. He said, my lord, prison is dearer to me than what they would have me do. And if you turn not their guile from me, I should fall fatuously to their lure and be of the utter fools. It's interesting. I might have to look into the etymology of fatuously, but of course it's come here from Arabic, from asbu ilayhinna, asbu, which has a link with youth, but fatuously reminds you of fata, which I don't know if he intended that, but fata and sabi, different words, but same kind of semantic range. So I should fall fatuously as a fata to their lure and be of the utter fools. Then his lord forthwith truly answered him and turned from him their guile. Verily, he is the all hearing, the all knowing. Yet incredibly after a time. So I wonder if the thumma here, he's sort of read a depth into thumma, which has been alluded to in the introduction. Um, where do we get the incredibly? Yet incredibly after a time, even after having seen the clear signs of his innocence, they saw fit to imprison him till a time. For me, the even does the job that the incredibly was supposed to do. So it seems a bit much to put the word incredibly. And two serving men entered the prison with him. So here, fatayan, of course, fatayan can just mean young men, but it's understood here in the way that, they were referring to him as her fata before. One said, truly in a dream I saw myself pressing wine. And the other said, truly I saw myself carrying bread on my head, which birds were eating from. Tell us what these portend. Verily we see you are of those who excel in every good. He said, food shall not come to the both of you as it normally does, save I shall inform you all about it to the last detail, well before it even comes to you. That is something of what my Lord has imparted to me, because I have left the faith of a people who believe not in Allah and of the afterlife. They are actual deniers. So you can see here, for example, when it comes to multiple tawqid, لا يؤمنون بالله وهم بالآخرة هم كافرون. So I feel that what he's done here, because of this sort of extra boost given by this second hum, you get the word actual. They're actual deniers. I hope if the Sheikh listens to my sharh, he would be pleased by it and not offended by my questions. And I have wholeheartedly followed the time honored faith of my fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Nor ever was it for any of us to worship anything with Allah. That is of the bounty of Allah upon us and upon mankind, but most of mankind show no thanks. So earlier on it was just men, and now it is mankind. Similar idea. My two fellow prisoners, are many divine lords all at odds better? Or Allah, the one, the indomitable conqueror of all? You worship nothing apart from Him but pathetic names you have made up. You and your fathers, for which Allah has not sent down the slightest authority. Sovereign rule is Allah's alone. He commands you worship none but Him. That is the solid upright religion providing everything. Yet most men know not. Interesting for a couple of reasons, right? Let's focus on the word pathetic names. So here, إلا أسماء سميتموها. So asma is indefinite. So what I understand from the introduction is he's taken that and seen the purpose of it being indefinite is for tahqir. I would go along with that. So you could put that simply in English as mere names. What you worship besides him uh, is or the illah. So you worship nothing beside him, anything but mere names, right? So pathetic names, I feel is a little bit over egging the pudding here. I feel like it's sort of formulaic. Tahqir equals the word pathetic. I don't think it fits very well, personally speaking, in the ayah itself, in the translation itself here. But pathetic names you have made up, because I don't think they would understand why he's calling them pathetic names. They are mere names. That is to say, they are names, asma bidun musammayat. They are names which don't have anything behind them. They're just names. And therefore they are worthless. But why pathetic? That they're not pathetic names uh, like for example, if they chose names like sludge or dust. These are pathetic names. It's not sent down the slightest authority. I can see where that comes from. The solid upright religion providing everything. Ad-Dinul Qayyim. So okay, I can see the word Qayyim, is being seen here as very rich and full of meaning. And that's where you get this sort of extensive translation. My fellow prisoners, as for the one of you, he shall serve his Lord wine. And as for the other, he shall be bound fast on a stake to die. and birds eat from his head. The matter is settled on which you ask judgment. I mean, I feel like maybe it needs and birds shall eat, but maybe that's a lack of my own English. And he told the one he deemed would be saved of them, mention me to your master. But the devil made the man forget to mention him to his master. So Joseph remained in prison a number of years. This is one ayah among numerous ones, even amongst those that we passed by in silence, where there are different opinions about how the pronouns should be taken, who does it refer to, who did the devil cause to forget, etc. Right? But here, one opinion has been taken. I presume it's the opinion that Sheikh Ali Hani also deems to be the most correct, and most convincing, and appropriate, and then the translation has followed it. But several opinions are considered valid in tafsir as to who is referred to by this pronoun or that. And the king said, I see in a dream 7 fat cows eaten up by 7 ones wasted thin, and 7 verdant ears of grain, and 7 others withered dry. O noble counsellors, give me your considered judgment of my vision, if you can tell what is meant by dreams. I feel there's a certain emphasis in kuntum lirru'ya ta'burun is along the lines of if it is actually the case, if you are truly the ones who can tell what is meant by dreams. They said, hodgepodge bundles of phantasms, nor know we the slightest of the portent of empty dreams. Now that's a very wieldy phrase. Do we say wieldy or unwieldy? They said hodgepodge bundles of phantasms. So adghaf is like a bundle and mixture, and ahlam are dreams, but here phantasms as in hallucinations, things that don't have a truth to them. Right. The focus seems to be better if I. Yeah. So why both hodgepodge and bundles? I'm not sure. I can see why you'd either go with hodgepodge or why you'd go with bundles. I'm not sure about hodgepodge bundles. The portent of empty dreams. So here the ahlam has been called empty dreams. So phantasms versus empty dreams. Why the variation between these two? I'm not sure. And the serving man who was saved of the two and finally managed to remember after the whole long time said, It is I who shall bring you word of what it portends. So but send me forth. Hmm. Why so but? I would understand here, if that's intended, that so just send me forth. But it's kind of awkward in English. So but send me forth. Also, I don't see any of that in فَأَرْسِلُونَ. So send me forth. Joseph, O righteous speaker of truth, give us judgment on 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 ones wasted thin, and 7 green ears of grain, and 7 others withered dry, that I may return to people, that haply they may know. He said, You are to diligently sow for 7 hard years. We saw this in the introduction, I won't repeat. And whatever you reap, leave in its ear, save for a little of which you eat. Then just after that shall come 7 unsparingly dire years. Yeah. But here it's not the word sinin is used here, but then here sab'un shidadun without the word for years. That devour all you have put up for them, save a little you keep for seed. Then finally after that shall come an excellent year in which men shall be wholly saved, and in which they shall press out the very juice and oil. I'm not sure what the very is doing here. The king said, Bring me him at once. But as soon as the herald reached him, he said, Return to your lord and ask him of the real tidings of the ladies who sliced their hands. The real tidings, I don't know, maybe something about the word bal. Oh, verily my lord well knows the wiles they laid. He said, What great thing betided you ladies when you seduced Joseph to lead him into sin? They said, Far be it from God. We know not the slightest ill against him. The wife of the vizier said, Now is the truth out. It's interesting the word vizier is used. I mean, vizier, of course, has its roots in the word wazir, unless I'm mistaken, which wazir is not the word here in these ayahs. So it's a kind of coincidence and an issue about the cognates here. But the word it's translating is al-aziz, which is it might be worth translating with a view to its etymology as opposed to wazir. A wazir is only used in some other ayat, especially about Harun alayhi salam. Verily, it was I who sought to seduce him, and he is of the Holy Truthful. Joseph told the herald, all of that was so my master might know. And here again, this is one interpretation. Joseph said, right, that my master might know that I betrayed him not behind his back, and because Allah guides not the guile of the treacherous. Nor do I absolve myself. Verily, the soul ever bids to ill. Save a soul, my Lord shows mercy. Verily, my Lord is all forgiving, all compassionate. The king said, bring me him at once, that I have him wholly for myself. So when he had spoken to him, he said, this very day shall you be placed high with us in absolute trust. He said, place me over the stores of the land. Verily, I am a keeper adept. Even thus did we establish for Joseph in the land. And again, Makkanna li Yusuf. At home therein, wherever he would. I mean, I think I understand this phrase, but it's not sort of self-evident, I think, in English. So he says, اجعلني على خزائن الأرض وكذلك مكنا ليوسف في الأرض يتبوأ منها حيث يشاء. At home therein, wherever he would. Meaning, wherever he wished to be at home, he would be at home. That's what I understand here. And there should probably... I mean, I don't know. Capitals seem to come after colons and semicolons, but not after commas. Yeah, anyway. We show our mercy to whomever we will, nor waste the wage of those surpassing in good. And the wage of the next world is far better for those who believe and are ever God-fearing. So nor, I'm not sure it fits well without neither. It can, of course, in some cases, but we show our mercy to whomever we will, nor waste the wage. I'm not sure that works, personally. Again, people with higher, qualifications in English language and grammar, mine are not bad, but يعني وفوق كل ذي علم عليم. And the wage of the next world is far better, right? And the brethren of Joseph came and entered upon him, and he knew them at once, while him they knew not. And when he had laden them with their needed provisions, he said, bring me a half-brother of yours from your father, for whom you also drew provisions. Do you not well see I replete the full measure, and am the best of hosts? So if you produce him not for me, you shall never be measured the more from me, nor so much as draw to me near. They said, we shall certainly entice his father out of him. Oh, even thus shall we surely do. Now, in our translation, in the Bayyinah translation, myself and Ustad Norman, we paid attention to the fact that we have got the same verb here of what the women had done, right? She sought to seduce him. وراودته التي هو في بيتها عن نفسه. And here, سنراود عنه أباه. Right. Here we are. قالوا سنراود عنه أباه وإنا لفاعلون. So we try to render that verb in a way that somehow worked in both contexts, right? So that is why we ended up with something that might sound a little bit awkward if you didn't realize why we're doing it, right? So I'll just show you that for a moment. Yeah, so ayah 23, and the woman whose house he was in tried to have him give himself to her. So that does probably sound a bit awkward, but the reason is because we wanted it to work in the later ayah when we will have him give us Binyamin, right? And by the way, this document, this is still in draft format, but as you can see, what's happening is that we've got a translation that we have reached based on extensive debate and arguing between ourselves. It's not a case of one person is the tafsir person, the other person is the translator, but rather we are both, we're both interested in the Quranic text directly. Um, I have more, if you like, formal training in the tafsir literature. Ustad Nu'man has his insights into the balagha of the Quran. And we debate and discuss things, we come to points of agreement, and our students also are noting down the rationale behind the things that we are rendering. So, inshallah, when this comes to be available, it will be something where you can actually understand the thought process behind it. And similar to what this current Quran Beheld uh, project has done, we want to release those discussions even in audio format, perhaps video format, so that people can really follow along, and so that future translators can also use that and build on that, including very near future translators, because we want that work also to be rendered into multiple languages with our uh, direct involvement and assurance that the person is following the nature of the discussions and conclusions that we've reached. So anyway, you now understand better why I'm particularly interested and excited to see this collaboration between Sheikh Ali and Nuh Keller. Right, where did we reach? He said to his serving men, "Put the things they paid back into their bags, so they may recognize them when they get back to their family, that happily they may return." The word happily comes quite a lot for la'alla, right? So when they returned to their father, they said, "Our father, measure is to be denied us. So let our brother come with us." I mean, it's interesting how muni'a has become a future tense. I can understand why, but I'm not sure it was necessary. "So let our brother come with us, that we may receive full measure while we guard him well." Still more wells? He said, "Shall I entrust him to you, sir, save as I trusted his brother to you, not but long before?" There we are again. Min qabl, not but long before, which to me is a little bit awkward, if I'm honest. But Allah is far better as protector, and He is the most merciful of the merciful. And when they opened their purchased supplies, they found the things they paid for them had been returned to them. They said, "Father, what more could we ask for? These are the very things we paid returned to us in full, and we shall get provision from abroad for our whole family, and guard well our brother, and so get another whole camel load, that is a load easy to get." He said, "Never will I send him with you till you bring me a sworn pledge solemnified from Allah that verily you are all bound to bring him back to me unless you are completely overcome." So when they had sworn him their solemn pledge, he said, "Allah has charge over all we say." And he was to say, "My sons, enter not by a single gate, lest you all be undone together, but enter each from separate gates. Though I can avail you nothing from Allah, decision is Allah's alone. On Him do I rely, so on Him let all who would rely place their trust." Now, what's this "and he was to say"? وَقَالَ قَالَ وَقَالَ. So why do we get from "he said" and "he was to say"? I'm not really sure of the reasoning for that. There's just some sense of like a little time had passed, I suppose. And when they had entered the city just as their father had commanded them, it could not avail them the slightest from Allah, save a mere need in Jacob's heart he had to fulfill. For verily he had tremendous knowledge of what we had taught him, both taking precautions, yet certain that nothing can avail from Allah, but most men know it not. Interesting. So we see here, إلا حاجة في نفس يعقوب قضاها وإنه لذو علم لما علمناه. For verily he had tremendous knowledge of that we had taught him. ولكن, but most men know it not. So this whole line, both taking precautions, yet certain that nothing can avail from Allah, this is something added, and it's quite significant. It's quite a significant line to add, but it seems that the translator feels that you will be completely lost without this elaboration or contextualization. And when they entered upon Joseph, he lodged his brother with himself. He said, "Truly, I am but your own brother." What about, where's the but coming from? I am but your own brother. قال إني أنا أخوك. Truly, I am but your own brother. So be not dismayed at all they have done. It's like we say, I'm nothing other than your brother. So when he had laden them with their provisions, he placed the royal drinking goblet in the lading bag of his brother. And by a herald gave cry, "O journeying caravan, verily you are thieves." They said, turning around and heading back towards them, "What can you be missing?" They said, "We are missing the king's own goblet. And whoever produces it shall have a camel load of grain." The head of them said, "And I personally guarantee it." So this is a little bit, again, sort of trying to settle the question of who's the one saying this, who's the one saying that, because there is some ambiguity and difference of opinion surrounding that. They said, "By Allah, you well know that we came not to work corruption in the land, nor ever could we be thieves." They said, "Then what shall be the penalty for what has been stolen, should you be liars?" They said, "Its penalty is that whoever's lading bag it is found in shall himself be payment for it. Thus do we ourselves repay wrongdoers." So when they returned, he began with their bags before his brothers, then finally drew it forth from the bag of his brother. "Even thus did we contrive for Joseph. Never could he have taken his brother in the laws of the king, save only if Allah had willed." Why save only? Seems a bit redundant. "We raise whomever we will, innumerable lofty degrees, and above any who possesses knowledge is one who knows far more." They said, "If he steals, truly a brother of his has already stolen before." And Joseph kept it within himself and showed them it not. He said to himself, "It is you who are viler in place, and Allah knows better what you describe." They said, "O Vizier, verily he has a father who is a frail old man, so take one of us in his stead. Verily we plainly see you are of those who ever excel in good." He said, "Allah be my utter refuge from seizing any but him we found our property with. Verily we should then be true wrongdoers." Uh, okay, so ma'adallah we've seen before in this surah. I'm not sure it was the utter refuge before. Did it get elevated to utter refuge? Or did I just miss that the first time? If we see here, um, he said, "Allah be my refuge," and here it is, "Allah be my utter refuge." There's no change in the balagha here. It's qala ma'adallah in both cases. Uh, Verily we should then be true wrongdoers. I think the then could be something clearer, because look, inna idhan ladhalimun, right? In that case, we would then, yes, we should in that case be. But I'm not sure. English readers might need just a little bit more help than what's given here. Maybe I'm nitpicking. No. So when they despaired of convincing him, they drew apart, conversing. Their eldest said, "Do you not realize that your father has taken a solemn pledge upon you from Allah, and your heinous negligence no great while before," again min qabl, موثقا من الله من قبل ومن قبل ما فرطتم في يوسف. So your heinous negligence no great while before in the whole matter of Joseph. Do you think that he's really saying no great while before, or he's talking about a long while before? In context, I think it's a long while before. "Never shall I depart this land till my father gives me leave, or Allah judges in my favor. And he is the best of any who judge. Return to your father and say, Our father, verily your son has stolen, and we but attest what we know for a fact, nor could we keep our word on what none of us could foresee. And but ask the city in which we were." Why and but? Awkward. It's like, "and just ask the city," maybe. Yeah. "And the caravan in which we came, verily we speak the truth."
He said, rather, your hearts have made plausible to you a heinous thing. So mine is patient grace. Sabrun jamil. Jamalun sabir. Right. Happily Allah shall bring them all to me. Verily only He is the all-knowing, the all-wise. Um, made plausible to you, is that the same translation as before? It could be. I'm just going to compare. When they came to him with the lying blood. Yes, back here. Before what happened in the house. Yes. Your hearts have made plausible to you a heinous thing, so mine is patient grace. Yeah. So, it's only right that translators should draw from what they have written before, but if they need to adjust it, they adjust it. Happily, Allah shall bring them all to me. Verily, only He is the all knowing, the all wise. So, I don't know. A lot of English readers, I think, happily is not familiar. They might read it as happily or something. I don't know. Husn al dhan bil qurra, maybe. And he turned from them and said, O my searing grief for Joseph. And his eyes grew white for very sorrow, choking back his grief. Um, and his eyes grew white, choking back. So, I mean, this is nitpicking again, but it's not his eyes that were choking back. So, something maybe is needed in this sentence to make it clearer. They said, by Allah, ever will you burn remembering Joseph. تفتأ تذكر يوسف. That تفتأ تذكر يوسف. I'm not sure, but that maybe I have to look into the etymology of تفتأ. But تفتأ has a function. It's a kind of functional word, but maybe its etymology has got some relation to burning. But it seems a bit of a strain to kind of indicate that etymology here. Ever will you burn, remembering Joseph, till you are worn away to naught, or of those who outright die. He said, I but complain my ungovernable anguish and sorrow to Allah. Bathi huzni. So I guess the bath itself is ungovernable anguish because it can't be kept in. It becomes broadcast, mabthuth. And I know of Allah what you know not. Ha, wa a'lamu min Allah. I know from Allah. And is translated, I know of Allah. I can see some justification, but I'll query that as well. My sons, go and search everywhere for Joseph and his brother, and despair not of the utter relief of Allah. Verily, none despairs of the utter relief of Allah, but the people of the unbelievers. Hmm. So, utter relief, I'm not sure why it's needed, but Al-Qawm al-Kafirun are the unbelieving people, the people who are unbelievers, but the people of the unbelievers becomes an awkward phrase, and I'm not sure about that. So when they entered upon Joseph, they said, O mighty vizier, affliction has touched us dire and our whole family, and we have brought but miserable merchandise, so replete us in gracious measure, and show charity to us. Verily Allah magnificently repays the charitable. He said, do you realize what you did to Joseph and his brother when you were fools? They said, can you be Joseph? He said, I am Joseph, and this is my brother. Allah has bestowed his blessing beyond thanks upon us. Blessing beyond thanks. قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ. Okay, I can see where we're going with the word man. Verily, whoever is God-fearing and patient, Allah never wastes the wage of those who excel in good. They said, by Allah, Allah has truly preferred you above us in every way, while verily we were of the grievously wrong. He said, no blame shall disgrace you even today. Where do we get the even? I'm not sure. May Allah forgive you. That's one way of taking it as, as a dua. And He is the most merciful of the merciful. Take this gown of mine. Qamis as gown, a bit unusual, but okay. Take this gown of mine and cast it on the face of my father. Did we have the word gown for qamis before? Because we had several occurrences, right? That's a famous thing about this surah. We have 3 shirts, right? So when they brought on his gown, yes. And when she tore it, rent his gown. Okay. So as long as there's consistency, that's all fine. But I don't know, gown sounds maybe it's a bit more like kameez that we wear in the subcontinent, right? But yeah, typically shirt, of course. Some said tunic. Muhammad Asad said tunic. And cast it on the face of my father, and he will come at once restored in sight. So that's one way of understanding Ya'ti basira, combining these 2 points. And straightway bring me all your families together. And as the caravan left that land, their father said, Verily I find the scent of Joseph, were you not to deem me witless with age. They said, By Allah, you are truly still in your same old error. So I'm going to say a lot about this ayah 94, but I'm not going to say it right now because I have a separate lecture which I'm recording, inshallah, called the Untranslated Quran. And I'll add the link to the description of this video as well. But I have another one where I'm going to go into even more depth about ayah 94 because it is one where the translators really have struggled, or not really struggled, just kind of shrugged off the responsibility of really paying attention to the word lawla and its implications. Lawla and tufanniduni. So I've done a deep study of the tafsir and also how the translations align or misalign with them. There is one translation which survives and which makes the cut and which actually matches with tafsir in any appreciable way. But this is not that translation, unfortunately. If you read this and put aside any knowledge that you might get from the subsequent video, but just read this sentence, I think you can see that there's a problem with it. Look, verily, I find the scent of Joseph, were you not to deem me witless with age. So does he find the scent of Joseph or not? That's the question. The start of the sentence tells you he does. Verily, I find the scent of Joseph. Then, were you not to deem me witless with age? So what we'd understand from this is, the second part tells us, were you not to deem me witless with age, I would find the scent of Joseph. But of course, you can't reconstruct that because you've got verily I find. So unfortunately, and with the greatest of respect, this sentence becomes meaningless in the English language and does not reflect the tafsir. So I have actually sent my findings to Sheikh Ali Hani to see what he says about that. Inshallah, maybe I'll be able to report back on that once I get to record that particular video. So it's not to intend any offense towards any translator, but just to show that, there's always scope for improvement. And if we cite again, وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ, no doubt any translation that I or others do, there will be people who come along and say, what on earth were you thinking in this verse? And we should thank them for that. And when the bearer of the glad tidings came, he cast it on his face and he regained his sight. By the way, I have a very unusual translation of this, a very unusual interpretation. I didn't find it in any tafsir. I won't go into it now, but that's one where people will come and question me later on. He said, Did I not tell you all that I know of Allah, what you know not? Again, أعلم من Allah. So maybe there's a taqdeer here, أعلم من صفات الله, من أمور الله, or something like this. They said, O Father, ask forgiveness of our sins. Verily, we were great wrongdoers. He said, I shall indeed ask my Lord to forgive you. Truly, He alone is the all-forgiving, the all-compassionate. So when they entered upon Joseph, he drew his parents to himself in full honor and said, Enter Egypt by the leave of Allah, wholly secure. And he raised his parents upon the dais, and all had fallen down prostrate before him. And he said, My dear father, so he's wanting to avoid the word throne, I guess. My dear father, this is what my dream foretold not overly long ago. This is overly wordy in a way, you see. But again, he wants to pay attention to this. هذا تأويل رؤياي من قبل. Okay, so not overly long ago. But I think again the dalala of it, the denotation of it, is probably the opposite of that. It was from all that time ago. Wallahu a'lam. The problem is that tafsirs don't tend to sort of make a point of spelling out in each case what the min qabl should be understood to mean, or whether there's a rule that is being followed in every case. So it's important for a thoughtful translator to exercise his or her best judgment in that regard, and then others can agree or disagree. My Lord has made it come true and shown me every kindness when he released me from the prison and brought all of you here from the open plains, even after the devil spurred up malice between me and my brothers. Verily, my Lord is subtly gentle in effecting aught he wills. Truly, he alone is the all-knowing, the all-wise. My Lord, you have endowed me of sovereignty and taught me of what dreams portend. Originator of the heavens and earth, you are my ever-powerful friend and protector in this world and the next. Take back my soul in whole submission to you as a Muslim. Well, okay, so he's combined here, the sort of the question that a translator faces typically is, do I put a capital M for Muslim, you know, or do I translate that word? Is it more or less reified? Of course, Yusuf alayhi salam is at a time before the word Muslim was, sort of the word in currency. But you could either translate it in whole submission or as a Muslim. But he's done both together, in whole submission to you as a Muslim. And put me among the supremely righteous. Those are of the tidings of the unseen, we inspiring them to you. I feel like there's a mistake here. I don't think we can have we inspiring. So, nuhihi ilaik, we inspire them to you, or we are inspiring them to you. You were not present with them when they concerted to do ill, laying their wiles, and most men, no matter how keen you be, are not believers. Nor do you ask them for it the slightest wage. It is naught but a momentous reminder to all the worlds of beings, and how many a mighty wondrous sign in the heavens and the earth they pass upon, while turned from it averse. Nor do most of them believe in Allah, save while ascribing partners to Him in worship. Feel they safe lest a dire calamity reach them of the chastisement of Allah, or the final hour suddenly break upon them unawares? Hmm. I'm not sure about the word lest here and how it's fitting in with this sentence. Feel they safe lest a dire calamity reach them, uh, or suddenly break. That's sort of subjunctive, if I'm not mistaken, in the same way. But the lest, I'm not sure about this usage, but again, those who are more into the literary English can do tasheeh of it. Say, this is my path. I summon to Allah upon the full light of insight, I and whoever truly follows me. So there's, a gloss here, truly. And how gloriously is Allah exalted. So we had Subhanallah. Actually, we didn't have Subhanallah before. We had Hasha Lillah. That's different, but similar kind of concept. Nor ever could I be of those who worship anything with him. So what is the nor doing here? I query it as I did earlier, the nor. And never did we send before you anything but men whom we inspired. By the way, the nor can fit in the same bracket as all these ands at the start. Nor and it's a part of, it's how the Quranic language, begins with so many wows. And here, wama ana min al-mushrikeen. So I'm perfectly fine with the strategy of including them, and that's the strategy that we are following in our translation as well. So it's just that when it's a sort of negative sentence, he's going with nor, I suppose. So that's maybe the answer to the query. I've answered it myself. And never did we send before you anything but men whom we inspired. Anything is interesting. Of the dwellers of towns, have they not journeyed in the earth? So the they, even in the Arabic, I suppose, is kind of ambiguous. It's not referring to these men. And just looked How was the end of those, but not long before them? To be honest, it's getting really awkward, this min qabl business. Um, because, you're just reading this in English, but how was the end of those, but not long before them? Why not just say, how was the end of those just before them, or shortly before them, something like that. And the abode of the next world is better for those of God-fearingness. For those of God-fearingness. It's like people of color. What do we have in the Arabic? خير للذين اتقوا, for those who do the act of ittiqa, of taqwa. So anyway, these are things which you're never going to make map directly. There has to be discretion in how you handle verbs and nouns and so on. And that's fine as long as we also have that same mercy on other translators when they do it in their way. Can you not even think? Until when our messengers gave over. Istay'as al-rusul. Gave over, I'm not sure about this meaning here. And thought they might be left unaided. Very interesting. Our triumph reached them, so those we willed were saved. And our bale is unrepelled from a people who wreak crimes. I feel like someone's going to have to consult not only a dictionary, but some kind of old English style guide to understand gave over and bale. Verily, in the full account of them is a mighty reflection for those of insight and mind. Nor could it be mere tidings forged, but rather the confirming of what came before it, and a detailing of everything needed. Everything needed, you see, kulli shay, and a mighty guidance and mercy for a people who believe. So the final point then, in our deep dive, just before the conclusion, this is an interesting one because I looked into numerous translations of وَظَنُّوا أَنَّهُمْ قَدْ كُذِبُوا. And here, interestingly, there are two authentic readings. There are two qira'as which are accepted and canonical, counted among qira'at mutawatira, right? So we have كُذِبُوا and we have كُذِّبُوا. And in a way, كُذِّبُوا is kind of easier to explain. So they thought that they have been rejected. Pretty much all the translators translated this ayah as if it says, أنهم قد كذبوا. ظنوا, they thought that they have been rejected, belied, disbelieved. Go and check. Go and look at the translations. But not one of them is going to tell you, as far as I've seen anyway, that, oh, here I have resorted to the reading of such and such reciters instead of kudibu because it's clearer. They just do what I call, as in my technical jargon, the great switcheroo, right? They just do a sleight of hand and leave you none the wiser as to what they have done. They replace one reading with another. But the word kudibu means they have been lied to. That's the word qad kudibu. It cannot mean belied or rejected. It means lied to. So that's where there are a few different explanations for how to understand the ayah in light of this reading. But one of them, this is the implication of it. So they thought, in a way, like he hasn't spelled this part out, but you'd have to understand until the messengers, some of the messengers even thought that in a way God has lied to them when he promised them aid. So when our messengers gave over and thought they might be left unaided. That's what I think he's basing this translation on, but it's definitely not a direct translation of أنهم قد كذبوا and thought they might be left unaided. So there's another switcheroo here, really. He's taken away the actual sort of wording of the ayah and replaced it with its lazim or its consequence, let's say here, its concomitant or consequence, and thought they might be left unaided. Maybe because he felt that saying that they had been lied to will be too shocking for the English reader. Allah knows best what was his intention, but maybe when we hear the source code, we will know what was the reasoning that went into that. But of course, the other main way Imam al-Razi mentions is even to see the pronouns as referring to someone else. So the messengers reached a point of despair, and the people, their people, thought that they have been lied to by the messengers, right? And at that point, جاءهم نصرنا فنجي من نشاء. And here, a lot of translators make a mistake on nujia. Even some of the senior respected translators who are very respected, they translate nujia as we saved, which is completely wrong. Nujia, as it says here, we're saved is a passive verb. طيب, so I'm going to switch now just towards the conclusion. I hope that's been an informative journey. I know it's been a lengthy one, certainly for me, but you could have broken it up. No one forced you to sit through the whole session in one go, but if it was that interesting, then alhamdulillah. I'm very happy to receive your comments below this video, and take into account any points of view you have or any queries you'd like to raise. Inshallah, I will do my best. And, in short, I don't have a concluding statement about it because, as I say, this is first impressions. But you can see what my first impressions are. I think it's a very rich work. It is a definite contribution to the field. It is something I'm very glad has come into existence. I'm excited to see how we can use it, how people will use it. I certainly will find it useful in teaching, that people will consult it and get a good idea about what's going on in tafsir and in the Quranic text itself, according to the Mufassirin and the people of Balagha and Quranic eloquence. And I think it helps us take the field forward into the current century and even the next century. And inshallah, I pray that we get the benefit of studying the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not just analyzing what the scholars and translators are saying about the words of Allah. May Allah open our hearts to benefit. Astaghfirullah al-azim. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.